So I mean, that let's run with it. First of all, rest in power to Chadwick Boseman, a phenomenal actor, an incredible human being, and someone who did invaluable work for blackness in cinema, um, and in media in general, right? And we're talking about value of life and of labor and of all and of a history of inequality and oppression, right? And one of the biggest reasons that Black Panther was so important was how valuable both economically and socially, emotionally, right, and almost in every facet of life it was to its audience, right? Its intended audience. And to be very clear, right? Yes, it was a film made for the public in general, but there's no denying having seen the movie many times. And one of the things I liked about the Time magazine article about the piece about the film before it came out is that it points out the fact that the movie was a black movie. It was meant for a black audience. You cannot get around
100%.
that fact, right? It's just like watching
100%.
a handful of other movies like The Wiz and Get Out, right? Where like the movie is intended for consumption by a specific group of people. Everyone can enjoy it, but it
Yeah.
will be enjoyed differently by an intended audience.
And I don't even think that everyone can enjoy it. I think especially when we're talking about Black Panther and Get Out, I think that it calls for such a black acumen, like black American acumen, that if if you have not lived like a black life here in the context of the states, or have like super high black IQ, there are layers of both of those films that are totally foreclosed to you. Totally foreclosed to you.
Yeah,
Like I firmly believe that Get Out is one of the most important Du Boisian critiques. And I'm telling you, and it's not because I read a lot of Du Bois. Like you have to have some high level like black credentials to get in, like to really parse out the layers of Get Out. And I think Black Panther is, I mean, just that line, right? Killmonger's like death monologue, that has a crazy resonance for me. And I feel like unless you are privy to that level of nuance of blackness, it's just an action flick.
yeah, and I think you're totally right. Right, with Get Out, there's a lot of both humor and metaphor and just like subtle imagery that you wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
recognize if it wasn't part of your experience, right? You would never
Yep,
think critically of things that you were seeing in those moments if it wasn't
that's
something
right.
that you understood deeply as part of your upbringing and the way that you know, very Du Boisian. I think you're accurate, right? The way that you see the world, right? Like
Yep.
I agree that that movie is an incredible Du Boisian critique, and we've talked about this before. I'd love to teach it in a class about
I'm
sociology
teaching
and
in the
cinema
fall. It's going
because
down.
I really want my students to watch it and watch it meaningfully because
Mm-hmm.
it it is important for bringing about that idea of double consciousness and how it works in reality. Um, and then with Black Panther, you have this really awesome juxtaposition of both the African American experience and the African experience, right? To be like, we're not just talking about blackness in one context, we're talking about both contexts that it can exist in reality and the ways in which they overlap and disconnect, right? That they are not the same. They have constants, and
Yeah.
they can inform each other in really significant ways that for most people like they miss the bill, right? And we talked about this
Yeah.
with um, international students who come here, during a tumultuous time like this, or who were here during a time like this when it started before they were all sent home, and I'm sure a lot of them couldn't completely fathom what the situation was for African American students. And African American students are probably like, why don't you understand me better, right? Like, why aren't you also as enraged as I am? And a movie like Black Panther
Right.
helps kind of set up a dialogue between those two experiences that's really important while paying like
Mm-hmm.
legitimate respect to the plight of African Americans and chattel slavery and the experiences of those who've been colonized, while also saying like there is black excellence that exists in native African tribes.
Yeah. And it problematizes blackness itself, right? There's like a presume to your point. There's a presumed homogeneity to blackness, right? It's and in the U.S. context, it's always reduced to African Americanness, right? And then kids like you and I are like, we're here too, and I'm hoping Ace is here, right? Like Ace is biracial, right? So like he's sort of like, yo, wait a minute, like we're in this combo too, and and I think it problematizes blackness and it problematizes the diaspora. It raises enormous questions about what it means to be black, and how black folk relate to each other. And I think that to your point, like it being a black text, the like that spoke to so many for me intimate experience.
Yeah. And what I didn't know, because I, in prep for the discussion, is that I didn't actually know that the original Black Panther comic, the character was created like directly in the height of the civil rights era. Like
Yeah.
there were things going on, with Stokely Carmichael and around that time, and then all of a sudden Marvel's like, aha, Black Panther, and then they were like, wait a minute, we should maybe change his name to something different because now there's these bad connotations around the term Black Panther. They're like, no, it's fine. We'll leave it the way it is, and we'll rock with it. And so like it became like a very important symbol in that way, and I think that finally having it rise to the level of like superstardom thanks to the success of the Marvel films, for a lot of people brought Black Panther and T'Challa as like a a significant black figure in a way that I think you and I were talking about is something that is hard to find for like young kids, right? I was thinking about the importance of like a black hero and just non-white representation in general, and growing up, like how rare it was to see anybody that wasn't a white guy in spandex, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
I think about like the first time I saw Star Wars, and I saw Lando, and I was like, "There's a black guy in space! Wow!" Like we got monsters and we got little bear people and we got the weird slug monsters and a bunch of white
And the
folk
token black
and one
guy.
black guy, right? Who's got like real nice hair, which was just very odd, and was like super cool and suave, and I'm like, well, this is dope. Like at that point, it didn't dawn on me that it was like kind of problematic, but I was like, it was nice to see a black guy in space like doing stuff, right? And then I was thinking deeper about it, and I was like, wait a minute, like my favorite DC hero growing up was Green Lantern, but it was because the Green Lantern that I knew as a kid was John Stewart. Right, like I didn't know other Green Lantern. Like when I was a young kid watching cartoons, watching Justice League, that's the Green Lantern I got. And so I was like, oh, he gets to hang out with Batman and Superman. He's like super cool. He's got this power ring, and I was like, this is the pinnacle of greatness. Like how could anybody be better than the superhero that's not afraid of anything,
Mhm.
right? That happens to be a black guy flying through space. But that was super few and far between. And for most people, Green Lantern is Hal Jordan, right? For most people, Spider-Man is Peter Parker. But without Miles Morales, like where the fuck would we be?
Yep.
I mean, I think about a movie just as pivotal as like Into the Spider Verse, and how the entire mantra is like you do not need to be some white kid to be a fucking superhero. You could be literally anybody.
Yep. Yep. You know, um, and I think I know we've had this conversation before, and I think I've said it here before. Like Into the Spider Verse to me is like the best Marvel movie ever. Don't fuck with me. Don't talk to me if you have any other shit to say. You can unfollow. You can unsub. I will crash all of my socials on that film. It was amazing. And for me personally, and maybe for you too, Marvin. Like he's he's an Afro Latino kid from New York going to prep school.
Yeah, I mean, if that's not the experience, like,
They're like, it just somebody somebody owes me royalties somewhere somehow owes me royalties. I want my money, and it was incredible. But it was something that I needed in 1998,
yeah,
and there was like a childish joy to watching it that I have never experienced. To like it gave me something I struggle to name it. Like fit not filled a void. That sounds so cliched, but it gifted to my 8 year old self something that I think in all my nerdiness I'd been longing to fill. And something that was incredibly absent. And there And so Miles' story is just super dope. The animation is super dope. With T'Challa and Black Panther, it brings me back to being in basements with my uncle Rob as he's like explaining to me the intricacies of these heroes and their teams and the villains and the anti-heroes and the cosmic forces that move them. Star Wars was also for me like an incredible eye-opener. And so were my conversations with my uncle Rob, because for like a kid from the hood who's like horizon was 96th Street, to think of the world at that scale was mind blowing. And there's something about Black Panther thinking through like what would have happened to an African nation had it managed to avoid colonization and reap the rewards of its bountiful resources. It poses an enormous question. And in moments like this, there's also something to be said about Black Panther being fucking bulletproof.
Hmm.
And it, it's been a shitty summer. It's just been a fucking shitty summer. Um, to do this work, to do We Can't Breathe, um, to do that with my boys here at the house, to do that without access to like the sort of blow off valves that I have outside of the Xbox and that kind of thing, um, has been really fucking hard. And both of those films gave us something powerful, meaningful, and it wasn't just representation, right? It wasn't just these are these are characters that could easily be white, but we gave them to you black just for y'all. These are black characters, and they require incredible black acumen to appreciate them, to understand them in their nuance. And in a moment where we're losing fucking neighbors and neighborhoods, where allies are getting fucking snatched up off the street, um, where we watched a police officer draw a pistol on a man, um, and grab his fucking shirt. This is what pissed me off about the Jacob Blake shooting, is that he could touch him. He could have wrestled him to the. I don't know the context. All those details are still emerging. He had a knife, whatever. Even if he had a knife, resisted, whatever it was, you could touch him, and they chose to fucking shoot him anyway. And then we watch, these clippings of Kyle Rittenhouse, and of course his name is Kyle.
Of course.
Of course his name is Kyle. Mom buys him an AR-15, sends him across state lines like it's fucking summer camp, and he shoots 3 people. And then Tucker call. Don't even get me started on him.
Yeah.
And in all of that, to feel like we don't even get to have our fucking superheroes, that killed. And I've been as even keeled as I could be about all. I've tried to be like a rational, objective social scientist, and I snapped like that when I got the news of one in the text in the group chat.
Yep. Yeah.
It was too much.
I mean, I
That was
remember
my limit.
I was just sitting on the couch and my partner was like, Chadwick Boseman died, and I was like, that better be a hoax. Like last week when they said that Eminem died, like no,
Yeah.
not this. This is not the time to be joking
It's
about
not a
that.
lot. It's not a
Um,
lot.
and it's like you said, to not be able to have your heroes is rough, and it's not even just like any hero either, right? Because in talking
Mhm.
about the fact that this is black media for consumption by a black audience, what differs is the ways that we were given these heroes, right? That Miles is like a gifted student who loves his parents, who only wants to be a normal kid, um, hanging out with his friends, doing the stuff that he loves, is bilingual and is like, it really, like you said, we deserve royalties because that was our experience, right? Was very much someone that we could resonate with and was more human than we're used to seeing black characters, right? There was no big redemption arc other than that he needed to like be comfortable being himself, right? That he just wasn't okay being him. And with T'Challa, that like he doesn't, like, his redemption arc is navigating, as you referenced, right, navigating blackness and coming to an understanding of what it is. But he doesn't have to go through some like impoverished depression arc. Like, he's a king. He's always a king, that and he will remain a king. Like, that is the premise of his character. He does not have to inherit shit. He doesn't have to get infected by anything weird, right? Like, he is who he is and what he is. His power is not his suit. It's not all this other stuff. It is being the Black Panther, being the king of his people, of ruling over Wakanda, right? And doing what's right for that group. Not any of the other like tired tokenizing bullshit that we see so prevalently in
Yeah.
other storylines,
Yep.
right? And I think that made it super important, and why the loss was so striking, right? Why we're now trying to figure out, what, in the group chat today, it was like, what happens? Do they recast it? Do they just, somehow bring back Killmonger? Do they, like, what do they do to sort of restore us to a place where we know we have somebody there that
Yeah.
understands us and that we understand at a deeper level, right? Like,
Mhm.
and I'll be frank, right? Like, it's no secret to y'all and to you and the rest of our friends that like my favorite Avenger is Hawkeye, right? Like,
Yeah.
I like the little guy who's not actually really all that special other than being, an incredible martial artist and he doesn't miss.
Yeah.
Um, but that doesn't remove the importance of Black Panther, but in any way, shape, or form. Um,
Mhm. No.
or any other heroes that have come and gone that have been representative of of an experience that's not the social norm, right? And that pushes against that sort of monolithic homogenization that you alluded to, right? That there is just like one level of blackness that everybody understands,
Yep.
right? And that it is everything that we could ever talk about. There's no dividers, no subsections, no there's it's all one body, one person, one group, one mind, and that no one can be particular in that capacity, which
Yeah.
has a lot of problems not just for characters and media, but has problems for the ways in which we seek social justice, the ways in which we advance the society, right? By people
Right.
trying to make an amalgamation of everybody that's struggling.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think about, like, I mean, in the when we're talking about um, Hoover's protesting, we talked about consumption, and I think that for a white audience, I think because Black Panther was like the first major like black film that was like widely consumed by um a white audience. Like, I don't know white folks who know Boys in the Hood,
Mm-hmm.
Menace to Society, Poetic Justice. I just don't know white folks who know those films. Um, and in a moment where so much of like the consumption of black content is about consuming black death, right? The virality of black death right now. Um, we as a nation have a voracious appetite for it, and Black Panther presented something else. And I think even though I think your average white viewer probably lost a great deal of the nuance to the film, I think it presented to them, even the most like ill-informed viewer, a lot to think about. Um, and I think therein lied part of its brilliance too, right? Is presenting blackness in its complexity outside of like the one note story that becomes so popular, right? The tropiness of black life that I'm just fucking tired of. That brings me zero joy. I mean, don't get me wrong, like I love those like 90s movies, but that's not what we need right now.
Yeah. Also, I think the other thing for me is the type of content that you get to now include as part of black consumption, right? Like um, white consumption of Black Death and just general consumption of Black Death through a number of different sorts of art forms, or just like general news, right? Becomes
Yeah,
pretty
right.
standard. But to know that you can have a story about an Afro Latino who is a young kid who's in a prep school, that you can have a story about a wealthy black nation that has resources, right? That
Mhm.
doesn't live in a world that all of a sudden like Infinity Stone snapped racism away, right? That lives in a world where racism exists but has resources enough to exist and and
Mhm.
and advocate for change, right? Like that's something we haven't seen. And it makes me think about when you're talking about your uncle and telling you about these things, right? It reminded me of my uncle Richard and him teaching me like, you know, if you're Latino, if you're black or whatever, like there's other stuff for you to consume outside of like violence and death and all the other stereotypes that get sort of like lumped in with the traditional experience of any minority, right? That like he's the one who taught me how to play chess. I was like, I thought chess was for rich white people, right?
Mhm.
But he was like, no, 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 like this is a thinking game. Like chess is for smart people. You should learn how to
Mhm.
play this, right?
Yeah.
Would I have ever picked that up? Probably not, because I didn't think it was something that we were about. I until
Mhm.
I had a black chess coach in middle school. I was like, oh, so black people do play this. Like this is a thing, right? Both my coaches in middle school were black guys. And they were fantastic. And I, Mr. Times, I still remember him. Like he was the
Mhm.
shit. Um, and I was like, oh, so this doesn't have like a weird sort of like racialized component to it where I'm excluded. Um, and music, the reason I think that my musical tastes are so diverse is because my uncle Richard was like, we're gonna listen to like some classic records and just like indoctrinated me into all these different genres and styles. And was like, yeah, like you can get down with all this stuff. It's not just hip hop, rap, and R&B until the day that you die, right? Like that stuff is all fine and dandy, but don't think that there aren't artists that are like you or like me or like people that you see on a daily basis that don't do this stuff, that don't vibe in this stuff, right?
That's fair. Right.
And I know that one of the big kind of galvanizing forces for even this show was initially like to discuss the fact that the scene that we grew up in was just devoid of blackness, and really still remains devoid of blackness, right? Aside from
Yeah,
like the weird groups
honestly.
that we dealt with, as we were growing up, that like did a weird mix of like post-hardcore hip hop and shit, right? Like I think of like the Broken Sides of the early 2000s,
Fucking
and other
bums.
groups like that, right? And I was like, well, this is just fucking strange. Um,
Which, to be clear, aged very poorly.
yeah,
Like that's. Oh, I have not thought about Broken Sided. Sorry, I know we're talking about something totally
no, no, I
different, but
know,
I've
but
not
like, but
talked
you think
about
about it,
Broken
right?
Sided
And like,
forever.
that's about as close as you got. Like,
Yeah,
realistically, like that was them trying to like bridge the gap and be
yeah.
like, yeah, we can meld these things together. Um,
Mhm.
but not in a way where like you felt like that space invited you in because it wasn't tailored to you, right? In a way that these films were tailored to people like us. That
Mhm.
scene wasn't. I actually still
Yeah,
sometimes like struggle to figure out like what was it about it that resonated with me so much that
yeah.
that like like committed me to being a a lifelong fan, because it I
Mhm.
don't know that all of hip hop speaks to my experience either, right? Like music is weird like that. Sometimes the
I
beats are
don't think
just
that
dope,
all of
but like
hip hop speaks to the experiences to
of
the
anybody.
people who make it,
Yeah.
right? Like Rick Ross, come on, bro. The capery is next level. For me, it was my cousin Janelle. Janelle was the one who folded me into the scene with like a lot of really good post grunge, and I was like hooked.
I mean I didn't have that. Like the scene was something that I literally like MTV2 and MTV Jams was like how I figured out that that music existed. And I was like, while I don't recognize these characters because I've never seen a swoop that hard in my life, because like color folk hair don't do that. Um, I was like, I kind of vibe to this. I think it's pretty dope. Um, But yeah, I mean, we're 30 now. We've been listening to that music since we were 13, 14, and like I think I can count all of the black artists in the scene on my hands. I think I only need one hand actually. Like there aren't that many. The, to say nothing of the fact that like there aren't scenes that exist outside of the American version of it, right? Like we talked
Right,
about
for
this
sure,
before,
for sure, for sure.
but
Yeah.
like that that media has never been made for us
Hmm.
in that way. That there are just certain types of things that unless somebody tells you you can consume it, it
Hmm.
like you are not the target audience.
Yeah.
And I know that that
Right.
was one point of concern that a lot of people had with Black Panther when it was coming out, and they tried to review bomb it in the same way that they've done with other films that star somebody that's not a, cis hetero white dude. They're like, don't start with me. Don't. You already know.
Well,
Yeah.
I just saw.
The semester ends on my birthday. For my 30th birthday, all my students will be turning in papers. It's very sad.
That's fucking awful.
um, right? But like a lot of people were pissed because they were like, "This movie is being made for not me," and it's like, yeah, everything else in the fucking world is made for you. Like, let us have
Yeah.
this. The
Hmm.
rest of the world is literally about you and your existence.
Yeah.
So if you can't understand something, you can't appreciate it, right? Like, don't just try to cancel it in the box office because you're like, well, if it wasn't for me, then no one can have it.
Black Panther's uncanceled. Like
I mean,
that's
it
just
it fucked the box office up. Like there's just no taking that back, right?
no,
And,
not at
and
all.
apparently, the tribute to Chadwick from Sunday was the most watched television like presentation I think of all time when I
Doesn't
when I read the
surprise me
headline.
though.
Like
Doesn't
everyone and
surprise
their
me.
mother watched it,
Mhm.
which I,
Yeah.
I don't I don't know that really tells us a lot. But I think it expresses the importance of those stories being told.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And I think and I've been bubbling over this for the last couple moments, Mothman. I think one of the film asks the question, what is Wakanda's responsibility to Killmonger, and how responsible is Wakanda for who Killmonger becomes?
Hmm.
And when I think about black NBA players going on strike on behalf of certainly of protesters and of the broader call for the mattering of Black lives, um, but on behalf of just other Black folk who aren't rich, who aren't wealthy, who live in ghettoized communities, I think that there's a sort of there's a resonance there, a resonance of questions, um, uh, both raised in the film and actualized now in this moment. I think ultimately there's the film was a gift. Boseman's talent was a gift, um, and but the questions and how we present answers to them raised by the film um, are still pressing. They're still pressing now, and we ignore them. I think at our own peril.
I think that's gonna let us just go into our last discussion.